Once upon a time, there was a guy named Jack who had big plans for a summer vacation abroad. Excited about exploring new places, he stumbled upon an intriguing advertisement on Facebook. It was about a fabulous tourist trip to Vienna at the end of July, priced at $2,000. The itinerary sounded amazing, so without hesitation, he booked and paid for it, eagerly anticipating the adventure. However, destiny had a twist in store for Jack. Just 2 weeks later, he came across another tempting advertisement, this time for a trip to Honolulu. The price was only $1,000, and he couldn't resist the idea of a more exciting and enjoyable experience. Without thinking twice, he also booked and paid for the Honolulu trip. But then came the disaster. After securing both trips and making the payments, Jack suddenly realized he had a major problem. Both trips were scheduled for the same week in July. He found himself faced with an impossible situation. He could only go on one trip, and the other would go to waste. What a dilemma! Now imagine you were in Jack's shoes. Which trip would you choose? Before you answer, let's consider something called the rational choice theory. This theory suggests that when people are presented with multiple options, they weigh the costs and benefits of each option, making a logical decision that maximizes the benefits relative to the costs without letting emotions influence them. According to this theory, Jack should logically choose the Honolulu trip because it would provide him with greater enjoyment and pleasure. But here's the interesting part. In reality, Jack chooses to go on the Vienna trip, even though he knows it won't be as enjoyable. Surprisingly, most of us would make the same choice. Why does this happen? Well, it all comes down to the price tag. The trip to Vienna, despite being less appealing, is more expensive. And that's what makes it difficult for us to let go. We tend to cling on to it and give up the trip to Honolulu, which would bring us more joy simply because it's cheaper. It's a curious quirk of human psychology. This tendency to prioritize cost over enjoyment leads us to make incorrect decisions that go against our own best interests. We become trapped in a cycle of holding on to choices we made in the past, even when we know they weren't the right ones. We fear wasting the money or effort we've already invested, and that fear blinds us to the better path ahead. Now imagine this situation in a different context. Suppose you're an investor or a business owner, and you consistently make decisions based on the same flawed mindset. You'll soon find yourself backed into a corner, losing money and precious time due to these misguided choices. Many people fall into this deceptive trap and suffer the consequences. So, why do we act this way? And why is it such a big mistake? What Jack did is a classic example of something called the sunk cost effect. Now, what exactly does that mean? The term sunk cost refers to the money or resources you've already invested in a particular project or decision but can't get back. It's like when you buy a movie ticket and pay for it up front, that money is gone once you've entered the theater. Or imagine you bought some cheese, but when you tasted it, it turned out to be terrible and even potentially harmful. The money you spent on that cheese is also a sunk cost. Another example could be when you put a lot of money and effort into renovating your rented apartment. Once you're done with the renovations, that money becomes a sunk cost because you can't recover it. In itself, sunk costs aren't necessarily a problem. However, it becomes a problem when you start focusing too much on it, even if it goes against your future interests. Let me give you some examples. Suppose you bought a movie ticket, and the movie turns out to be awful. Instead of wasting more time and feeling obligated to stay because you already paid for the ticket, it would be better to cut your losses and focus on the future. Similarly, if you buy some cheese and discover it's terrible, it's better to accept the loss and not force yourself to eat it just because you already spent money on it. And let's say you find out that the neighborhood where your rented apartment is located isn't safe or suitable for you. Despite the money you spent on renovating it, it would be wiser to move out and find a better place. In all these situations, the best approach is to ignore the sunk cost of the past, accept the loss, and concentrate on what lies ahead. If you solely focus on sunk costs and let them dictate your decisions, it will undoubtedly harm you in the long run. It's important to recognize that what's done is done, and instead of dwelling on past investments, It's smarter to consider future outcomes and make decisions based on what will benefit you most. You know that saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Well, in our situation here, there are no birds in the bush waiting for us. It's just an illusion based on the information we have. Instead, we're stuck between a small loss that's right in front of us and a much bigger loss in the future. It's clear that reason and logic would tell us to choose the smaller, immediate loss. But sometimes our stubbornness gets the best of us, and we fall into the trap of sunk costs. Let me give you an example to illustrate this. Imagine someone opens a restaurant and invests $15,000 to set it up. However, things don't go as planned. The location isn't ideal, and the food doesn't match what customers want. As a result, despite marketing efforts, there's no customer base for the restaurant. It's just not working out, no matter how hard they try. In this situation, it would be best to close the restaurant, cut the losses, and use the remaining money to explore other potentially profitable opportunities. But here's the catch: the owner finds it difficult to let go. Because they're fixated on the $15,000 they've already spent on setting up the restaurant. It's hard for them to move on. So, month after month, they keep paying rent and salaries, incurring a $2,000 loss each time, hoping for a miracle turnaround. The problem is that they're focusing on the sunk costs that have already been incurred, which won't bring any benefit. What the owner fails to realize is that whether they close the restaurant immediately or stubbornly hold on and close it 10 months later, the financial outcome will be the same. It's just a matter of when. If they close it right away, they'll only lose the $15,000 they've already spent. But if they stubbornly hold on, hoping for a change, and close it 10 months later, they'll end up losing $35,000. That's the $15,000 setup cost plus the accumulated $20,000 in monthly losses over 10 months. So, the $15,000 that seemed so difficult to let go of at first becomes insignificant compared to the bigger loss they'll face if they hold on. Now, let me clarify something. I'm not saying that anyone with a project facing challenges should give up immediately. Of course not. I'm referring to situations where there's ample evidence that the project is financially unsustainable in the long run. In those cases, it's best to close it down as soon as possible to minimize the losses. It's crucial to carefully consider these options and not let the sunk cost blind you from making a rational decision. By accepting the reality of the situation and cutting your losses, you can mitigate further risks and explore better investment prospects. So, why do we tend to behave this way? There are several reasons, and one of them is what behavioral economists call loss aversion or the pain of losing. Basically, we have a fear of loss and try to avoid it as much as possible. The interesting thing is that the pain we feel from losing a certain amount is much stronger than the pleasure we feel from gaining the same amount. It's just how our minds work. Another reason is that we often prefer to stick to the wrong path rather than face blame. Blaming ourselves or others can be tough, and if we decide not to fall into the sunk cost fallacy, we have to face the fact that the money or effort we've already spent on a project is gone. This can make us vulnerable to criticism, especially from those involved in the project. These psychological barriers make it challenging to make the right financial decision. However, there's hope. To overcome these barriers, we need to have a reasonable level of maturity and psychological resilience. That's why it's not just a coincidence that as people grow older, they become less likely to fall into the sunk cost fallacy. A study conducted in 2008 by researchers at West Virginia University found that older adults are generally less prone to this fallacy compared to younger individuals. It shows that with age and experience, we can develop a better understanding of making rational choices. Sadly, many people fall into this trap because their emotions strongly resist the idea of losing the time, money, and effort they've already invested. They keep going down the same path, only to realize later on that they're even more stuck and tangled. It's a frustrating situation to be in. Anyway, I've finished explaining this phenomenon. But I have a question for you. Have you or someone you know ever fallen into the sunk cost effect? If so, please share your experiences in the comments.